In essence, what I'm going to do today is do a presentation on the two books of which the covers, if you can see on the screen earlier. Doesn't matter? No? Okay, there we go. Basically, The History of God, which is my first book, which is actually it's an amalgamation of a prequel and the first book, and then Beyond the Source, which is part one of two. Part two is currently with Ozark for editing. We're ready to be produced and presented to the fair-paying public, as it were, next year. So it's quite interesting from that perspective. So what I'm going to do now is talk about my awakening, how I started a journey amongst the frequencies and meeting my first energetic entities, those being Byron Hum, who was sent to help me, some aliens in Crete, and say aliens, our brothers in incarnation, I should say, these days, and the Om, who are a race of entities who were created as part of the creativity process of creating the source entities, or a God, by the origin, that entity that is classified by Hindu texts as the Absolute. A short history of the origin and the source entity. Then a bit about spiritual physics and the source entity's multiverse, that multiverse that we exist within, and indicating the 12 dimensions, or 12 full dimensions, that's an important word, 12 full dimensions that we exist within in the physical universe and the multiverse. And an illustration of how those dimensions are overlaid by using technology that we use today in our everyday lives, but probably don't see it because we're not involved with it so much. Then I'm going to show how entities can ascend through the frequencies and how we lose communication when we incarnate and come down through the lower frequencies, because it's an important thing to consider that when we come down the lower frequencies, we do in fact actually lose a lot of our communicative ability with our true energetic self. Then I'm going to talk about why we're here and the importance of the Earth. Then I'm going to go into the book called Beyond the Source. I'm going to describe a bit more about what the source entities are and describe some of the information about those source entities in terms of the maintenance of source entities and the information I've received in Beyond the Source Book 1 about source entities 1 through 6. And then I'm going to very briefly describe some of the information I got by compiling the information that made Book 2 possible. So this is going to focus on the history of God right now and my awakening. So from a very early age, I've been involved in the metaphysical and been interested in metaphysical, specifically in my early sub-teen years in UFOs and in those days science fiction before I got involved in metaphysics. And I read many metaphysical books of the day, those books that are groundbreaking and milestone books in today's language. And as a teenager, I meditated extensively, both before I went to bed and as I arose in the morning to go to school. And then in one of my waking meditations that I used to have in my bedroom, lying down, meditating, I was approached by 4 individuals in white robes. And they smiled benevolently to me, and they spoke in a way which wasn't clearly speaking. It was through intuitive knowledge and through telepathy. And they said to me that what I was doing was right, and what I believed in was right. But it wasn't the right time for me to get involved with this level of detail, that I needed to go and experience more information, more work to do with the physical universe. So from that day onwards, I really took a back burner on metaphysical things and decided to do what everybody else does. I went out and got a job. I progressed through the ranks of that job within that company I was working with. I met my beautiful wife, Anne, got married, of course, and we bought a house and endeavoured to pay the mortgage off. Within that period of time, I gained 2 master's degrees part-time and became a chartered engineer, and subsequently worked to progress and become a European engineer. So it's all very physical stuff. And then during my late 30s, my very late 30s, a friend of mine on one of my business courses said that she was going to a Reiki share night. Would I be interested? And that made me open one eye and lift a metaphysical ear. And I thought, well, I'll go to this and see what happens, because I was a bit interested but wasn't particularly convinced. Anyway, I went to this Reiki share. 12 months later, I popped out the other end as a Reiki master, which was quite a record in those days. And I thought, well, there's something more to this. So I started to be involved with getting some energy healing from another lady, a lady called Helen Stott, who was a first-generation student of Barbara Brennan. Now, some of you might know Barbara Brennan. She's been very influential in the US, writing books called Hands of Light and Light Emerging, and a recent book as well. And she's also managed to get university degrees accredited. I think it's Berkeley University. She managed to get it in California for doing some of her energy healing work. And she was also involved with Dr. John Piriakos and his wife Eva Piriakos, and Susan and Donovan Tasenga, who worked on the Pathwork series of personal work books. And one day she was talking about the work that she was doing when healing me. She said, I'm going to do a Suck It and See weekend because I'm trying to do a course that's going to be based upon the work that Barbara taught me. Would I be interested? So I said, yes, okay, I'll go along and do this whole weekend. I went to the weekend and promptly signed up for 4 years rigorous training. It was the hardest training I've ever done. It's been harder than all of my academic work in my master's degree for business and my master's degree for science. It was extremely searching. I had to go into psychotherapy like the rest of the students, which was extremely hard work to sort out all of our own rubbish to make sure that we didn't pass it on during our own healing. And it was during that work that I was able to start to work with and was trained to work with moving up and down the frequencies to affect healing on the different auric levels and on the chakras that are manifest and predominantly presented on some of those auric levels that they're associated with. And I found this quite easy to do. Now, around the same time, another friend of mine who went on the business courses and also went on to be a Reiki master as well, was working for a car company that I knew, and he moved away from the UK and went to work for another car company called Saab in Sweden. And my wife and I took the opportunity to go for a holiday, a free holiday, basically. We flew over there with Ryanair and we stopped with Graham for about a week. But what I didn't know is at that point in time, his Reiki master had said to him, you've got to take Guy on a riverside walk along the river that goes through Trollhättan. And if we can see that river there, okay? The area to the right of the river was where the walk was. And as we walked down through the woods to this pathway, I started to feel my fingers tingle, and then my palms tingle, and then my arms tingle, and then my whole body tingle, because the energies were extremely strong in that area. And as I was walking down that pathway, there was a rock on the side, and I thought, well, I've got to sit down here and meditate, because this rock was isolated. I could jump from the pathway onto the rock and sit down and meditate. So I said to my wife and Graham, I said, I'm going to sit down here and meditate. I need to meditate. And they said, OK. So I sat on this rock and meditate. And they went onto the suspension bridge that you might just about be able to see halfway up the river. Now, when they were sitting there watching me, they got the feeling that there was a heavy other presence there, alien presence, energetic being presence. And they were working with me and rewiring me for whatever work I was supposed to be doing. But whilst they were experiencing this and I was on the rock, I received the most profound attunement I've ever received in my whole life. It totally threw me. When it finished, I was stunned. It was worse than being drunk. I couldn't string 3 words together. And that lasted for 2 or 3 days. I think it was 4 days, actually. And thinking about it makes me think, ooh, incredible. And at the time, I started to perceive things. And I noted some of these strange craft that were there around me, just by the trees on the other side of the river. Now, there was no wind at all. But what I experienced was these things, cloaked as it were, presenting an outline on the side where the trees were, and there was what appeared to be helicopter wash on the river surface. There was no wind at all, but there was lots and lots of waves and things coming away from these areas. So there's obviously an effect on the river by the craft that they were using. And there was definitely no wind there at all. It was absolutely amazing. And from that day onwards, I started to be able to do more and more than I was being taught by my teacher in the Brennan Healing Science. And that led to me being able to journey through the frequencies. So as part of the work, as I just explained, of working with energy in the Brennan Healing Science, we had to work to move up and down the frequencies by working with the chakras, extending them, as we did this morning with the earth meditation practice, and as I'm going to do later on today as an experiment with you all, the meditation, to move you up the frequencies a bit yourselves, to enable us to affect healing on the various different auric layers and the chakras that are pronounced predominantly on those auric layers. For instance, the 6th chakra, the third eye is predominant on the sixth auric layer. The third chakra, the solar chakra, is predominant on the third auric layer because the frequencies are involved.